Aloha and welcome to the Act 90 Working Group hearing for today, September 9th, 2021. It's 10 a.m. We're meeting by a video conference from across our beautiful state of Hawaii. The purpose of today's meeting is to continue discussions on the issue that we have been assigned to discuss the Act 90 implementation. Welcome to all the members. For those who are here to testify, that'll be at the end of the agenda, and I'll just ask you to, if you can, keep your comments to about 3 minutes and be available for questions if that's okay. That'd be great. If we lose connection, we'll just try to start up again. So just rejoin if we lose the connection. And if for some reason there's a catastrophic failure, we will reschedule and we'll send out a proper notice for doing that. So if I could ask, I think we've done our introductions in the past, so I appreciate that everyone is here today to join us. What I'd like to do first is thank you to our support of DLNR and Department of Agriculture for assisting us in preparing minutes. We did circulate the minutes from the August 16th and August 23rd meetings, and I'd like to approve those. Do I have, everyone had a chance to review them and any comments? Chair Case.
Thank you. I did have a chance to review. Actually, I was reviewing the August 16 minutes and just want to note a couple of clarifications. Let's see, one is on page, sorry. Sorry, my computer's not responding here. Okay, on page 2, at the bottom of the page, it says the next meeting will be held in 1 week on Monday, August 16, and that should be 23rd. Second is on page 4. It says Deputy Ada said DOA's focus is on the agricultural activity on the property. However, in terms of power and authority, both DLNR and DOA are relatively similar. I think that is what Morris said, but I just note that, you know, there are significant differences, which we talk about in the meeting, on the ability to do direct lease extensions on a finding of public purpose and appraisals at ag prices. And then on page 8, it says Deputy Ada responded that a revocable permit is, he said, treated as a new lease from DOA once it's transferred over. And I think it's actually converted to a new lease. That's their practice. They can take it to the board for a finding of public purpose that supports direct negotiation of a long-term lease option. And then lastly, I just wanted to clarify the wording on the circumstances of the Daniel K. Inouye Highway project set aside for Palila habitat. It says that DLNR Administrator Smith admitted there are parcels that DLNR has taken, and it's actually, we note that DOFA has received parcels in this mitigation because it wasn't a DOFA action, it wasn't a DLNR action, it was a highways action that was going through the Palila habitat forest, the Mamani forest, and it had to be because they were taking Mamani forest, they had to do a trade-off so that the highway could be built, and so DOFA received that. They couldn't do reforestation immediately at that time, but we have submitted other information that since then 269 acres have been restored at Ka'ohe and 400 at Pu'umali.
Yeah, and
that's what I got.
Okay, well, I appreciate your thoroughness in reviewing that. Maybe what we should do, we should work with you to make those corrections, and we'll bring it back again for approval. Because there's
okay, I can send them in.
That'd be great. Okay, let's do it that way.
Okay.
Any comments on the August 23rd minutes? maybe we could approve that one and then we'll come back and do the August 16th one at the next meeting. Have a motion to approve.
Yeah, so move.
Thanks. I can second it, but Suzanne, do you want to second it? Somebody else?
Oh, if I'm a voting member, sure.
Yeah, you're on the working group.
Yeah, I heard a second from Morris. So.
Okay, great. All right. So Lorraine, Senator
somebody.
Inouye moved and seconded by Deputy Atta. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, hearing none. So we'll approve the minutes of the 23rd. The 16th will come back and we'll make those corrections. Okay, what I'd like to do, I want to mention to everyone again and mention to the public who is watching that we thank you to the Department of Land and Natural Resources and to the Department of Agriculture for providing submittals on describing what is the status of the parcels of land that have been transferred or being considered for transfer. And so we were able to get those documents and post them on the working group website. So it's available for people to review. And I appreciate your effort to pull that together. I think that's a part of our working group's responsibility, is just to get the facts out there so people can get it. So we have a number, last time we met, we had testimony from lessees. And what I'd like to do today is to take the opportunity to learn more from your perspective in the agencies about some of the issues that were brought up. I have a number of questions myself, but I would like to defer to the other legislator members first to see if you have specific questions, and then we'll go to the non-legislative members of the working group after that. Senator, Co-Chair Inouye, do you want to go ahead and start, or I can request others?
1 second. Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yes.
This is regarding the testimonies that were received. I think at this point in time, hold on, I lost somebody. I think at this point in time, I think it's more appropriate for the agencies to respond rather than for us looking at their testimonies. I would prefer deferring to DLNR and to DOA because most of the comments were directed to them at this point in time.
Okay, any other legislator members have specific
Because
questions?
I think, I think it's appropriate that the agencies have time to make comments on, because we didn't since the testimonies were at the end of the agenda.
Okay, okay.
Representative, this is Gil. Agron.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Lorraine's approach on hearing from the agencies, but I would like them to focus a little bit on the responses then, on how did they address the concern that was expressed by some of the testifiers that the management of existing lands that DOFA has, it has been, has not been done well, and whether that's because of budgets or because of other things, and whether or not they're prepared to really take on the additional lands that they're planning to hold on to, that right now are, and I guess for a lack of a better word, are being managed by the lessees, and whether or not those leases or licenses or revocable permits by ranchers for pasture lands, whether there's conditions in there that require, some stewardship and some management. And I guess so. In the comments from the department, I think we want to know, how they plan to fund management going forward.
Well, maybe we can start with that, and then I've got some other questions. Chair Case, do you want to try to address this issue of a concern we heard from a number of lessees where parcels of land or portions of their lease was taken out, but for reforestation, but didn't seem to be anything done? Is it lack of funding, or how does that work?
Yeah, and I would like to defer to David Smith and Emma Ewan and Steve Bergfeld on the details. We did submit some briefing papers to show there's actually been quite a bit of work gone on. And again, I started to talk about the lands withdrawn for the mitigation for DKI highway, but there's at least there's a good half a dozen examples on the Big Island. Dave and Emma and Steve, do you want to just talk about what's going on there?
Yeah, I can start out, Senator. The first, well, one of the things I heard last time was Brendan Baltazar, and we submitted testimony on that. We don't even think that his lease is relevant to the Act 90 working group discussion, but that's another issue. The fact is that, he said that, we don't manage the Kula Forest Reserve adequately, and we take issue with that. It's actually one of the most popular recreation forest reserves in the state, and the area was heavily denuded earlier in the last century by ungulates, including cattle and goats. And there was a previous time in the division of forestry, or the territorial forestry, when they were going into these denuded areas and really wanted to just get anything that would grow fast. And so they were bringing in plants from all over the world. And in that particular forest reserve, they planted a lot of non-native plants, including pine trees and black wattle. And those, especially the black wattle, became a problem, and it's pretty overgrown with it. And we're working hard and converting some areas. So, he said, well, you can't even walk in a straight line. It's yeah, because it's a forest, we replanted it as a forest. And so from a watershed standpoint, it's a, a good working forest, and it's also a good watershed area. And, some of that non-native stuff provides good habitat for endangered species like Hawaiian hoary bats and whatnot. So it's not as if it's a total loss. And the concept that we're going to take back more areas specifically from that particular lease is no, we have the funding, we have the resources to move forward on it. We've done quite a bit of fundraising, and we're ready to manage those areas. Our approach these days is to plant native species and restore native ecosystems.
Can I interrupt just a second, David? I went back and looked. It was about a year ago. There were big press announcements about the purchase of the parcel, with federal funds, state funds, Trust for Public Lands was involved. And could you explain, because it sounds like this is the lease that Mr. Balthazar has was originally with the private landowner, and then the state bought the private land for the purposes of reforestation, right? I mean, could you explain that? Because that was just, I looked back to see, and that seemed like what it was.
Okay, yeah, that land was for sale on the open market, and it was placed on sale in the open market. Mr. Balthazar has had a lease with various private landowners on that property for some period of time, but when it was put on the market this last time, they changed the lease to be able to be canceled in 1 year because they were selling it. And one of the prime potential for that property was development into gentleman ranches and whatnot. And so very high potential for development, and so they didn't want a long-term encumbrance. And so there's a 1 year cancellation clause on the lease. He said in the Star Bulletin, the Star Advertiser article, that that lease wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, as if that's something that the state did. But that was a lease that he signed with the previous private landowner and didn't have anything to do with the state. The state recognized the potential loss of watershed and open space lands and potential forestry lands. And so we put together a group of funders and purchased the land, along with help with the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so the land was purchased for reforestation and protection restoration of endangered species habitat. And that lease that Mr. Baltazar holds has a 1-year cancellation clause on it. So over time, as resources permit, we're going to phase out that lease. But that was something completely different. It has nothing to do with this Act 90 discussion in terms of potential for transfer to the Department of Agriculture. That land was purchased for specific purposes with funding sources that require certain outcomes. And so that's just not relevant.
That's useful to know. I appreciate that. I don't know, Senator Keith Agaron being from Maui, I don't know if you had any follow-up on that, because that was a concern I had, is that we were not hearing the whole story.
Can I have an answer?
Please, Senator Inouye, yes.
Okay, so David, can you give us for next meeting anyway, the appropriation that was purchased from the different entities, and also if they were state funds?
Yeah.
From CIPs as well. So if you can send it to us for our next meeting.
Yeah, the short answer is it was $4 million Forest Service, $2 million Fish and Wildlife Service, $4 million of state CIP money. And then there's some other funding from private sources for restoration and management. So, but
Okay.
I can get you all that information in writing.
Okay, that'll be great, because with regards to the state CIP funding, and usually it's designated for its purpose to create the CIPs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another issue I just wanted to point out to answer Senator Agron's question was, it was mentioned in the last meeting that we, by Mr. Moniz, that we had taken back this Palila critical habitat lands out of his lease, and we weren't prepared to manage it. But that was really something that was out of our hands. It was relative to the highway, and the straightening of the saddle road and the building of the DKI highway. And so because that highway encroached on critical habitat lands, the department had to give up or designate some other lands for Palila restoration. And so it was kind of a, it was a trade-off in order to build that highway. And we did not ask for that. That wasn't initiated by us, and we weren't prepared to manage it at that time. So we would like to circle back, and perhaps we're having some additional conversations with Mr. Moniz, and I think we're working that out. But that was something that was alluded to, that really wasn't a situation that was where we went in and took back a lease and then weren't able to manage it. That was kind of something that was handed to us.
Can I ask Emma to just fill us in quickly on the current status of restoration? Because as I said, there's been quite a lot done.
Yeah, hello,
At
this
that
is Emma Ewan with Division of Forestry and Wildlife. We sent out a fact sheets that showed some of the work that we've done on some of the main parcels that have been transferred to Division of Forestry and Wildlife. And you can see overall, there's been close to 400,000 trees planted across these areas. There's been many miles of fencing for hoofed animal removal, fire breaks, a lot of work with community forestry entities, such as the Akaka Forest Foundation and others that have wanted to manage these areas. And some of the smaller parcels, as well as the larger parcels, have been open for hunting, which is its own form of food sustainability for our for the public. So that I think, asking, oh, do we not have enough funding, or what's the problem? In reality, we actually are carefully and intensively managing these areas. And I believe that these fact sheets that demonstrate the work that has been done can really explain that that picture. Additionally, in addition to the state funds that we get, we've received millions of dollars worth of federal grants. In fact, we just received, another $1 million federal grant just this last week or so from for Pubaba, for instance. And we're continuously trying to get out-of-state funding sources that help us manage these areas in the long term. So that's a pretty diversified source of funding that we use to manage these areas. And it's all for, watershed protection, endangered species protection, hunting, and in some cases, we want to also provide a lot of cultural benefits, such as the Kapapola Koa canoe forests that we've been managing as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Can I add one clarification also?
Go ahead, Chair Case. Yes.
So just so everybody's clear, so our land leases and revocable permits generally are held by the land division. And, when there's something that is an opportunity for DOFA to step up management, like there was in South Kona where the lessee, wanted out, and then we can go ahead with a set aside to DOFA and management from DOFA. So it's not like, the lands that we are holding on to are going to be sort of en masse converted out of pasture leases to forestry. That's not how we operate. Where they're held by the land division until something happens and there's a good opportunity on all sides to do some different management. Maybe it's a collaborative management with the permittee, like we have at Puwawa. So that is with DOFA, but it's continued grazing because there's an opportunity there.
Thank you. Overall comments that we got from lessees, from those who testified previously, was that they didn't believe that DLNR was the right place to manage these because food production wasn't a priority, and I'd like to, and so that's why I felt DOA would be better. And then of course there's the lease options that DOA has authority for that DLNR doesn't. We've been hearing these issues for years, and could I ask the DLNR sort of what have you done to try to address these issues, and how do you go about managing these multiple uses of these properties to include food production as well as other conservation value?
Sure. Well, I would just point out that food security is one of the overarching state goals, and everyone is responsible for that, as well as natural and cultural resource protection. There are constitutional requirements, and we have different agencies doing certain focuses, but we're all responsible for this. And again, pasture grazing can happen in DLNR just as well as it can, if not better than it can at Department of Agriculture. In addition, we do quite a bit of work with hunting as a food security issue, and that's one of the main important things to hunting and gathering. Those are food issues that are very important to the community that we do very active management on.
I also would like to add that the watershed forests are our source of water that enables agriculture as well. So we really need to protect these forests, which often drain out, the Hamakua ditches. All these water diversions come directly from our forests. So without protecting these lands, which have been largely damaged due to a history of ranching and other land conversions, we only have a very small part of our forests remaining, and that is really key to continuing to allow us to have food self-sufficiency and water on our island state.
Yeah, and Chair, if I may add, Russell Tsuji speaking.
Yes.
If you look back on the history, all of these leases actually started with DLNR. All of the agriculture, all the pasture leases. DOA at the time had only ag parks, which is basically large tracts of land which multiple tenants they subdivide and lease out for agriculture. But we had the small individual farmer growing all and ag parcels all over the state, and and then it's only after Act 90 came about, then the agricultural tenants went over. Majority of the when you say growing food products, vegetables, etc. At the time of the initial transfer, DOA was not into, or at least I should say, my recollection was not into focusing on the pasture type tenants. It's only after more recently they've been asking for some, because of the pasture tenants have been asking for transfer as well. Meanwhile, DOA, through their amendments to their rules and for the non-ag park leases, they've been able to provide some benefits to the tenants more than what we could do under 171. And so, as you know, we've been seeking legislation to try to equalize the ability to whether we can do extensions or direct leasing is one big one, because we're currently 171 requires an auction right now at this point. Yeah, but I just wanted to point that out, that if you remember, all these leases are actually started and emanated from DLNR itself, and so we were definitely, the board was focused on ag production as a one of the purposes of these leases.
Point. Thank you. Deputy Atta, do you want to give us some insight from Department of Agriculture with the lands that were moved over? This is non-ag park, so this was a big change for the department. And how does the department, how have you adapted to this, and how does this fit into your strategic plan? And then secondly, how does it work for you when you have these issues of multiple use, that you've got to have hunting access and hiking access or easements up to the forest reserve? How does DOA work out those issues?
Thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. I think, well, first, let's speak generally to how it affected the department as a whole. Yes, initially in terms of land management and activity use management, our focus was limited to ag parks, because the intention, I believe, was to encourage the growth of agriculture, and that was through an incubator type arrangement with the newer farmers. Over time, when Act 90 was adopted, basically the mission expanded to all aspects of agriculture, which included ranching, pasture, and all of that as part of the agriculture food production industry. And so our mission changed in that respect. Our department expanded its management capabilities for property management to incorporate all of these activities. We devised two sets of administrative rules to cover those two different types of activities. So the department has adapted over time to properly manage, and with the support of all of its additional divisions, which provide expert technical support in concert with CTAR and the private agriculture sector and USDA, we really began to provide significant support and in helping ag, become, what it is, and hopefully, grow even further. In terms of the issue of multiple use properties, we actually agree in concept with what DLNR is saying, is that properties can definitely have multiple uses. Where we slightly differ is in terms of who should be managing the significant or the most active use on the property when that use is occurring. And it's not that we disagree with everything that DLNR says. In fact, we agree with most of the issues or concepts regarding the expertise and the resources and the appropriateness of DLNR engaging in everything that it's doing. And as a department, we fully support the conservation, watershed preservation, endangered species, types of efforts that DLNR does, and we do believe they do an excellent job of doing that. I guess the concern comes when we have significant ag activity occurring on lands that are suitable for ag, and where there is this debate going on about who should be overseeing that ongoing significant use. And the farmers and ranchers, seem to be expressing the viewpoint that, well, ag understands what we do, so let them manage us, is basically what I'm hearing. I think the crux, at least for us in this situation, is can these multiple uses and multiple priorities be addressed and managed under a collaborative or concurrent management system, which ensures that neither the industry suffers nor the conservation, watershed protection, natural resources, cultural preservation, recreational uses. Neither side actually comes out, losing in this management arrangement. We have always taken the view that, collaborative management occurs and has occurred for the longest time, and is still a feasible scenario under whatever recommendations this group comes up with. A classic example of that, I think, was actually brought up in the testimony of Kala Farms in this recent batch of testimony that was submitted. We take issue with how the testifier characterized the management, capabilities of DOA for this particular situation, where a rancher was not in compliance with his lease, and as a result allowed cattle to run into the Waianae Hills and become feral and destroy a lot of natural and cultural resources, which resulted in the likelihood of that wildfire situation that happened. And we totally agree with that assessment. And in fact, this case was a case that demonstrated that, in fact, Department of Ag and DLNR worked collaboratively to come up with the right ultimate solution, where an ag parcel was not properly managed. We moved to cancel the lease. And when we were informed by DLNR about the feral cattle population destroying resources, it was in fact our property manager at the time that worked with private ag interests that came up with the solution of removing the feral cattle out of those areas. And once that was done, I believe DOFA requested that the lands be withdrawn and reset aside to DLNR to properly manage those cultural and conservation resources in the forest reserve. So that is exactly what happened. We worked with DLNR, we canceled the lease, and we transferred the lease back to DLNR because we all concluded that the cultural and natural resources were more significant and should properly be administered by DLNR. And I believe that's the kind of collaborative work that we've done in the past that demonstrates that that there is a working collaborative relationship between the agencies. So the question that in our minds regarding the focus of the Ag Working Group is, well, okay, if this is possible, can arrangements be created where the proper agencies are managing their respective priority areas? I think it can. The scenario that we're looking at is basically from a use management standpoint, we are similar somewhat as to land division at DLNR in that we manage a an actual economic activity and use on the land for that generates generates revenue and meets our food sustainability goals. But we operate and we believe that at any time there are cultural or natural priorities that need to be addressed, that we either defer to DLNR for those matters, or we work collaboratively with DLNR for those matters while we manage the ongoing commercial activity. And that's basically the model that we've adopted and how we've operated in the past, as demonstrated by that Waianae Valley ranch, I believe, situation where we agree that the land should be taken out of active farming and dedicated to conservation, cultural, or forestry use. Yes, we should withdraw and set it aside to DOFA or whoever the appropriate agency is. And in fact, in Puna, we currently have another one of those situations where I believe cultural resources were discovered on the property. So we are requesting that the properties be withdrawn and set aside to DLNR because specifically the existence of important cultural resources on that property. So I think it's possible to work together and come up with proper management and proper handling of these issues. And basically that's kind of what our department's position has been and what we continue to promote.
Well, I appreciate your dedication to cooperation and collaboration. That would solve a lot of the challenges we face. Any comments, Chair Case? I know you've been working on this together after hearing.
Yeah, I think so. We very much appreciate our working relationship with the Department of Agriculture, and the question really is kind of who should hold the property, and in terms of like whether there's active agricultural management, I'm not sure how much active management there is other than in some of these lands that we're talking about, which are in the non-agricultural park lands, other than managing the lease and collecting rent, which we can do and we do. But where there's a multiple use, so first of all, a lot of these lands, I was rereading on Nicole Galassi's, I don't know if it was in her testimony or her op-ed, but she was saying, I think she said there were 2 million acres in ranching 100 years ago. There's only 4 million acres in the state. And so all those lands, really, they were forest lands that were converted to ranch lands and also sugar and pineapple. And it was the big oligarchy that really did that taking of natural and cultural resources, places that people lived and gathered, Hawaiians did. And so, what we're trying to do is, as I mentioned before, is hold the line on that and not have further conversion. And so where there's multiple uses, that's why we feel strongly that we should hold on to it, because we can manage it. There have been situations where there's been problems in the leases that have been transferred, and even though they're pretty straight ag leases, DOA has said, okay, there's a problem here, we're going to give it back to DLNR. So we're used to doing that kind of management. We did do a pilot project to transfer lands to Punaholo Ranch lands to ag with restrictions in the executive order. And unfortunately, I sit on the Board of Ag, and they came up pretty quickly for a transfer for a conversion of an RP to a lease by direct negotiation. And then also in a separate one, it was a lease extension. I believe those were the two. And the restrictions that we had put in the executive order weren't in the lease. And the only reason I caught it was because I sit there on the Board of Ag, and I was intimately familiar with this. And so this is why, the multiple uses, we feel quite strongly that we need to, be directly there for that oversight. And maybe I could ask Bob there was another situation with the dairy farm, I think it was on Hamakua, where the hunters were looking for access. Bob, can you just talk about that situation there
Yeah,
as the multiple use
and
example?
Morris is familiar with this because let's see, am I unmuted? Yeah, okay. This was the O'Okala farm dairy ranch several years ago. I forget when. Morris might remember. I got a call from the County of Hawaii County Council chair that there was a whole bunch of hunters that were very upset at their being shut out from access to their hunting access. And but I said, but that's a Department of Ag lease. And I was told that she tried calling and there wasn't a response that was adequate to meeting the group that was pretty hostile at that point gathered in a large room. So she asked me to come and help. So we went over and we talked with all of the people who were upset, and I think we managed to get a more gentle spirited discussion going. And I called Morris that night immediately. Morris and I have worked together. I respect his professionalism very much. And so I called him right away to let him know. So he flew over and took over. But it was a situation where had it been our lease, because we work constantly with these issues with hunters and gatherers and all of that, I think it would not have led into that kind of community upset. Morris, you might want to comment on that because we turned it over to him and that was our sense of cooperation also.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Bob that this is actually a good example of the agencies collaborating, because what had been an issue was the access that was being provided on an ongoing basis be turned into a criminal trespass property damage situation that the current lessees were upset about because they were having challenges with the dairy operations and environmental issues. They had to suspend operations, and which resulted in a situation where all of their assets on the property were basically, open. And what was happening was equipment and was being taken, property was being damaged. So they were looking for some kind of controlled access situation to mitigate against that situation. So as a result, we, because of the hunters being involved, we knew that this had to be a collaborative solution. So we worked closely with DLNR to work with the hunter groups to come up with some viable resolution. And currently we have a controlled access arrangement that, as far as I know, appears to be working. But that's the kind of collaboration that, I envision. I know, I understand what DLNR is saying, that if it was under one roof, it might have occurred quicker. I don't know that for a fact. But I understand, the concern that is being raised. But this is how, I envision our agencies, should be working and actually are working together to resolve issues like this.
Let me add something to that as well.
Yes, please.
Yeah, one of the issues that involved with this particular parcel, and I think it sends a message to us to look at how we're going to extend leases when there are other factors involved, and I think probably Russell knows a lot about this as well as Morris, where you have leases that originally were in sugarlands as well, and then were a creation such as the dairy in Ocala. The area that DOA managed, another issue that came up with that was the extension of the road beyond the parcel that DOA was involved with or managed. There was the original plantation road that became a roads in limbo. And so the hunters felt that there's this road and passage that would take the trails to further to go into the forest. And so it kind of reminds us that moving forward in creation of leases, that when an entity is given a lease, that they have to abide with some rules as well. And I'm sure they do, most of them. But I think if the dairy had managed their property, like creating fences along the border where it reaches a road, whether it's under DOA or the county or a roads in limbo, that there are some passages open for hunting. And I think that's an issue that we should consider moving forward, because the burden always say, the complainers will always say, well, it's DOA or DLNR. But then when it comes up where it's an issue cooperatively with a county, where it becomes part of the county's, I guess, managing of the roadway as well, because, that's to me a complaint we hear often. But then do we put the burden on the agencies because the lease is on a lessee? So it comes to mind then, we should take into consideration, no different than your issue that was raised and explained thoroughly by Morris, the agreement that we had identifying historical sites. So when you do a transfer before acceptance, and I'm glad that DOE does their due diligence, because they're identifying parcels and areas that have historical value, and then who else is using the lands, like hunters and everybody else. But that issue with the dairy was a multiple area of different agencies, the county, DOA, and it becomes a burden to DOA as well, because it seems like everybody's complaining it's an action that DOA should manage, but also that we have to recognize that the lessee is responsible of securing the management of their concerns about keeping their lease viable, and make sure that, the cows are gonna disappear someday and walk on the road and go elsewhere. But I think the pressure too has to be given to the lessee when we make arrangements, and put some restrictions that, if you're going to use these open lands that become lands transferred from DLNR to a lessee as well, that some consideration should be able to at least relieve the government from a liability.
Or in this case, Mr. Chairman, I think the initial point of concern, not contention, but concern, is that the agency that's responsible for managing the lease needs to have the capability on hand to respond to circumstances, in this case, that way. But, we cooperate and we communicate with our colleagues. Right now, talking about dairy, the LNR is working very diligently, talk about food sustainability and ag related, to support the restoration of medical dairy as a production plant in East Hawaii. So we've worked with the County of Hawaii and Glover Construction to reconfigure land in a tightly held area in the industrial area in Hilo to provide for 1.5 acres more for the expansion of the dairy production facility of Meadow Gold. And in conjunction with that, I've worked very closely with the owners and others to look for and try to help with facilitating conversion of properties, whether it's private. In this case, Meadow Gold has recently purchased 400 something acres from Parker Ranch. So we're assisting and helping to promote the idea of checking the feasibility of restoring a reservoir, as well as looking to our seaworm folks in securing adequate water supply for that area, which is available. And Senator Inouye is looking at a whole bunch of other ag-related water stuff, which the two of you are working closely with us on. And so our efforts are not in particular only designed to look after DLNR interests, but for the state's interests and public, public support. And, all of this will be Department of Ag purview, but to the extent that we can help expedite the restoration of a dairy industry, we're doing our best to do this. So it's another example. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. Over to you, David Smith. You have your hand up?
Thanks. This is a great discussion, and I think it really demonstrates how Department of Ag and how Department of Land and Natural Resources work together and go back and forth to try to find the best fit for any particular piece of land and any particular tenant and land use. And the original Act 90 legislation that was pushed, I believe, by the cattle industry or some of the grazing tenants was to just transfer over all the leases. But in discussion, it became, let's do it by mutual agreement between the Board of Agriculture and the Board of Land and Natural Resources. And you can see with, some of Morris and our chairs discussion is we do go back and forth on these things a lot because there are all these considerations in any particular piece of land. So what I think everybody's going for is we want to keep good long-term tenants on the land. We don't care so much about the money. We want good land management. And that's the goal of both of the departments. And we work together to try to make that happen. Kind of the flip side of that is what we're talking about is issuing long-term no bid leases to a few select individuals, and then allowing those current lessees to reassign leases to individuals of their choosing at terms that they can negotiate directly, which, in a sense, kind of privatizes the property. So, when everything's good and everybody's acting in the best interests of the public and the state and, the public trust resources, that's fine. It's a very flexible system that allows us to keep good people on the land. We want to keep long-term good tenants on the land. But if things go wrong, you can see how there is potential for problems to creep in with a system like that. And so it's kind of this pendulum that swings back and forth. It works great, it's really flexible, and it helps us to keep good people on the land. But then if some people abuse that system, then people start looking at us saying, hey, how come this happened? And we try to tighten down the rules. And so it's kind of this yin and yang. And I think the departments working together, we try to do the best for tenants and for good land management.
I just have to add comments with regards to the discussion that we had back then for Act 90. And I think the testimony was well said between the two agencies that they will, it's not the burden that DOA will accept all the lands. They did say that they will look at the lands to be transferred And it will be their approval whether they accept the land transfer or not. And so, and it has continued, if we look at the reports from both agencies, that DOA has not accepted all the lands that were given over to by DLNR to DOA. So there have been a good relationship, and Act 90 didn't prevent the agencies from not doing that, because I think they did indicate that, you know, and we all understand that, because good management land for agriculture and food sustainability has to be the utmost importance for DOA to manage those lands.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I appreciate it. First, let's go to Deputy Atta and then to Deputy Masuda.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, perhaps maybe it's a misperception, but once the lands come over to DOA and you know, it goes through all of the collaboration and the due diligence and all that, it in fact is not subject to alienation or transfer, you know, just freely. We do have controls in place to prevent the inappropriate transfer for private gain, private uses, or inappropriate uses through our lease assignment and no subletting provisions in our leasing policies, and that all assignments or transfers of lease interests or, you know, or RPs go through the agency vetting process, as well as is subject to our board approval. So some of the fears that are being mentioned about, you know, good intentions, you know, falling by the wayside and ending up in private hands, I think that concern should be, I guess, assessed in light of this safety net process that we do have in place to prevent that from happening.
Thank you for that explanation. Deputy Masuda, Bob, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out historically, and back when I first served as first deputy, the first round, back in 2005, 6, 7, Deputy Atta was at our land division at that time. And actually, Morris and I worked very hard on this Act 90 thing, because we were told that we needed to get it done back then. And we worked very hard, came out with a whole master list of all of the properties that potentially could be transferred. And we worked in conjunction very closely with then Deputy of Ag, Dwayne Okamoto. The three of us, Morris and Dwayne and I, worked very diligently on that. And we turned over the whole thing, all the properties, the listing, the inventory, everything. And at that time, the answer back then came back that the capacity to manage all of this was not available at Ag. And since, you know, I guess they're making changes, but the thing that came back also was more or less what I would call, in colloquial terms, cherry picking, you know, picking certain ones rather than a whole bunch of things. And so we took exception with the idea of cherry picking, because, you know, you can't have everything and leave all the problems back. You're either going to take stuff or you're not going. And so that's one concern. And if you look at carefully at the areas where we are trying to protect for DLNR management, there are two issues I would like to point out. One, they are not small 10 acre, 20 acre growing vegetable kind of ag parcels. They are, and by the nature of ranching, they require larger, you know, grazing areas. That's the nature of ranching. And so these parcels that are pastoral grazing leases that are adjacent to the forest reserve, that have been taken initially from the forest reserve, that over long term, should a rancher decide to cease operation or, should beef go into another kind of form of, protein, whatever the case may be. The conversion, the proximity to watershed and forest and the size of these pastoral leases is a concern. And that is why, after reviewing all of the issues, including all of these kinds of things we're discussing now, we felt that the simple act of allowing the LNR to work with the current lessee before the end of their current lease, and if they are interested in continuing that food production capability, that we would be given the authority to extend the lease just as ag would. And with that simple authority, we, as David says and Chair Case says, and most, as David Tarnas knows, we live with all these ranchers. They're our neighbors and friends. We're not anti-ranching, and I certainly am not anti-steak. I mean, it's my favorite food. But I think there have been incidences that cause for distrust and all that. We understand that, and we've attended to those issues and all. But when you look at even the Punaholo Ranch testimony, where they said, well, they invested in this property, and then when it came up to the end of the lease, somebody they had to pay 7 times more because somebody else was. Look at who's fighting with who. Another rancher trying to get their land. That's not the LNR, and that's not Ag Department. So the management authority to provide secure transition and to protect assets and to provide for more investing, I think, is the security issue. And so we are looking to help provide that security for ranchers by being able to work with current lessees. I just wanted to say those 2 points.
Well, if I may just follow up on that briefly, let's say like Kapapala Ranch, for example, they were very concerned about being able to get back to recoup their investment, and so how does DLNR work with lessees to ensure that they are going to be able to recoup their investments and they have the motivation to invest in their property?
Well, in particular, one of the concerns we have we very much want to support Lonnie Petrie and her stewardship of the land, and she's been a great partner with DOFA and the hunters in allowing 4 months of the year, on 2 months here, 2 months there, hunting access in the top half of Kapapala, the half that is closest to volcano. And because that's a big one TM, Kapapala is made up of a bunch of TMKs. The biggest TMK is the one that was acquired, the half closest to the volcano. And that's a hunting game management area. And so 4 months of the year, hunters go in, Lonnie helps with the whole thing. It goes well. So we're thinking, well, we want to help them. And we know they would like, Lonnie would like a long-term thing. So why don't we take that half and shift that over to DOFA and provide the 8 months of grazing to whomever has Kapapala Ranch, and allow that grazing as a fire reduction and control mechanism to go on. That would help her not having to pay all the taxes on half the property.
If I could add, yeah, go ahead.
And the other thing I wanted to mention.
Yeah, if you could wrap up. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. The other thing little thing, but ultimately, when you look at the lease at Kapapala, it comes out to under $2 an acre per year. Now, that's a big subsidy of public lands. And whether it's Kapapala or any other ranch, I'm sure the state subsidy of that particular food production capacity, needs to be looked at.
If I could just add the, your question was, how does the rancher protect their return on investment? And I think you have to look at what the private dollar investment was, because I know they made a big investment in their in their
Reservoir.
water system by building a reservoir, which, by the way, included cutting down a whole bunch of koa forest trees. And I'm not sure the history on that or whether, what approvals it went through. And that would be the kind of thing that, we would want to keep a close eye on. But I believe there was a lot of federal dollars that went into that investment. So, there's a private piece of it, I'm sure.
NRCS.
Their lease is, they got a main building and they got outbuildings, residential outbuildings, and I don't know, tens of thousands of acres. And I think their lease is 44,000 a year. So that's the kind of thing you want to look at, because, I think it's justified for them to make some private investment in their managing of the ranch as well. Thanks.
The reservoir improvement was significantly supported with NRCS funding and support,
Okay, thank you.
and a lot of work on their part, on the Petrie's part.
Well, it goes to say that I think when DOFAR decides to draw the lines in parcels anywhere in the state, but I think there should be some recognition of how you're going to compensate any investments that made by the lessees as well. Because when you're drawing the lines, and I think that should be in consideration, if you're going to use it for forestry, then make sure that if it's forestry, don't take the assets that a lessee has done that takes care of pastoral activity.
Absolutely.
I think
Mr.
that's the
Smith?
problems they were running into.
Go ahead, David Smith.
We
You
agree.
have your hand up.
Yeah, one of the things we've done, we've worked with ranchers in the past, and grazed areas in cooperation with ranchers, worked with NRCS to get a grazing plan, had allowances for public hunters to access the area for game bird hunting. And we really wanted to graze it for the benefit of game bird hunting. And so we worked with the ranchers, gave them a very, very low, almost no cost lease or permit on the land. And what we did was just went in and built all of the improvements. So we installed all of the fencing, we did all the water units and whatnot. And that allowed the ranchers to utilize the property for the production of cattle. We had a grazing prescription that benefited game bird management, and then hunters had access for a couple of months a year. And so that was one way that we worked with ranchers to make sure that they didn't have too much upfront investment. They were able to benefit. And so it was a mutually beneficial arrangement. And I think we've also done other things with ranchers where we've provided materials. And so there's different ways that we can work with ranchers to make sure that the proper investments are made into the property, and yet the ranchers aren't over leveraged. We don't want to see people get over leveraged, and we don't want them to lose investments or have to be, if they leave a lease or leave property, we don't want them to have a loan obligation hanging over their head. So certainly we need to make sure that folks don't get a lease pulled out from under them and have a big, ongoing financial obligation.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Bob Masuda, you got your hand up, and then I'd
Just
like
wanted to
follow up.
say, just wanted to share with you, Chair Tarnas and Chair Inouye, that currently, Dr. Moniz had mentioned on his ranch up here on the slopes of Mauna Kea. We have in the last several months worked with Jason and Jerry Moniz to look at and explore a whole new concept in terms of the lease, the current pastoral lease they have for the ranch. And as a secondary thing, to look at the area that was taken for the highway from part of it was taken from their ranch, like 2,000 something acres. We're looking at a ability, and I'm working with both the bird people as well as the ranch with Dr. Moniz, to look at whether we can create a system where we can have, birds fly from oasis of forest to oasis of forest. It doesn't have to be totally trees. And so we're looking at exploring creating oases of forest for birds with grazing underneath to keep the fire load down. It's a new pilot idea. and we're in process now. But the LNR is actively working with a rancher that has a lease on looking at creative ways of both sides playing win-win.
I appreciate that. That was very heartening to hear. It was very heartening to hear that you were making that kind of progress with Moni's family. That's really good.
David, I think you have to move on with the agenda as well, because
Yep.
I'll be leaving
Sure.
soon to catch my flight. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you. Good reminder. So if I may, what I'd like to do is to have those who are with us to give testimony to go ahead and do that, so we can ask questions if need be, and then we can come back to our discussion. So there were two people who submitted testimony, written testimony, which we forwarded to you. One of them looks like is here, so I'd like to ask Nicole Galassi. She didn't send in written testimony, but she's here on Zoom. Did you want to mention anything, Ms. Galassi?
Hey, thanks, Chair. Chair Tarnas and Chair Inouye. Yeah, I didn't send in written testimony, but I wanted to be available here if anybody had questions. I may or may not be able to answer on behalf of the ranchers. In response to Chair Case about my statement about the 2 million acres in grazing back in 1937, I do understand that this was, while this was converted to forest, today there are less of those lands that are not in active pasture anymore. What we're trying to do is look at where we are now. This industry is an important commodity to Hawaii, but it is being demonstrated that these lands are being decreased for conversion to other uses. Sorry, one second. Sorry about that.
We can come back to you if you like.
No, I'm good. Sorry about that. I had to turn on my video. Sorry about that. So I think the issue is that there are some conservationists who kind of envision success as converting lands all the way back to what land used to look like before human contact. But as a whole, that's not feasible or necessary, especially when we have concrete development to contend with. We have to look at where we are now and what the best path forward is. So it's not that any rancher is asking to take more forest to convert to pasture. That's already been done. So we're asking for that the lands that are in active production to support that staying in active production, because there are many acres of land that are in conservation now that do need the work. So while you work on that, allow these lands to stay in production, because both conservation and ranching and food production are important to the community. So there are many acres of Hawaii's land that need management, and we're asking you to focus on restoring those lands while allowing production to continue on the 750,000 acres that are currently in grazing. It is heartening to hear that there are ways that DLNR can work with the ranchers, but we would like to hear more about that. It is difficult to kind of just jump into that, but it is heartening to hear that you're open to working with the ranchers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ka'ala Farm, Inc. Kamoa Kitevis, or is a representative here. Otherwise, we have written testimony from Ka'ala Farm, Inc. You can take a look at that. And then we have another piece of written testimony sent from Keone o Kakuhiheva, Oahu Council of the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs. Is there anyone here to present on their behalf? If not, I refer the members to the written testimony. Are there other, we also received a note from Jason Moniz asking, he says, when I noticed when reviewing the deal in our list of pasture acreage withdrawn from leases that approximately 2,100 acres withdrawn from KK Ranch in 2010 was not listed. So that was the comment from Dr. Moniz. Are there any other members of the public here that would like to testify? If so, please turn on your video. If not, thank you. Let me then now turn back in the, we have about 15 minutes left, a little bit less. If I could turn back now to the working group members and we can continue discussion. What I'd like to do is actually ask quickly why DLNR didn't include the KK Ranch withdrawal on your list, and was that because of what you've described, Chair Case, that this was not a DLNR action? Go ahead.
I'd have to double check with land division and stuff, but if he's talking, if he's talking about a list of DLNR withdrawals or DOFA withdrawals, it was not a DOFA action that caused it. It was mitigation required for the highway. He might be talking about something else,
No, I
which
think
we
it sounds
can
like what it was.
double
So-
check on.
Yeah,
Russell,
what
did you-
year, what year was that, Chair Tarnas?
Well, his note was the.
Because we only
listed-
went back to 20 years like the Senator requested, yeah.
It was 2010.
We
Oh.
can double check on it.
If you would double check on that, that'd be great.
It
Yeah.
might have been on, we sent in there was a list that was DOFA, particularly set aside to DOFA with their comments. We also had the canceled RPs. And then we had the withdrawals from the leases. Some of them were not necessarily for DOFA. It was some for highways, etc. Yeah. So
Okay, so maybe.
That's-
The,
I don't know
Go
if
back and take a
he's
look at-
looked at all of those, but if he did,
Yeah,
I'll
I
check.
think Russell, it's a KK Ranch, 2,100 acres.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
alright.
that did happen, and the 2,100 acres were taken from KK Ranch, not for transfer to ag, but was taken out for the highway mitigation.
The highway. Okay.
Was the highway mitigation.
This
And
this was in
that's why.
2010.
And that's a fact.
Okay, so that apparently is why it was not included on that list,
On the DOFA list. Yeah.
on the DOFA list, yeah. Let me ask a question, something that came up numerous times. Why are there so many RPs with DLNR and not more leases? You know, that was something that we keep hearing about. Could you explain why you choose to go with revocable permits instead of leases?
So, you know, I will say, and other people can chime in, revocable permits are more flexible in terms of being able to charge an appropriate amount of rent for whatever you include as part of the agreement. They are also flexible in terms of they can cover a part of a parcel, whereas you might have to go through a whole subdivision process to do a lease for a whole parcel. I mean, there may be other reasons to need that flexibility. Of course, in our, you know, our point here is that we don't have the ability to do direct negotiation on a lease. And so if somebody wants to, is under DLNR and wants to convert from an RP to a long-term lease, we have to go through public auction. And then they risk losing it. And like I said, you know, some of these parcels are very, obviously very attractive and other people might want to bid on it. And maybe that's the fair thing to do, but it's not the same as the DOA rule.
So let me add, David, let me add to that discussion as well.
Yes.
So having said that, so, you know, I have been a supporter of the request to give the authority to DLNR in its negotiations, similarly to what DOA has experienced all these years. But so one question is, if in the event that we feel we should make those changes and give DLNR the authority to at least similarly to what DOA has, then what's going to happen to the revocable process? And also, you will have many changes to the process, I would believe. And that, you know, we have to discuss further to see if that's possible.
So
You know,
maybe I can ask.
Gonna be made, yeah, what changes will be made or looked at, and I think Russell would probably be good at responding and Chair Case as well.
Thank you. So could you respond, DLNR, just if we were to get these additional authorities for lease negotiations and extensions, how would that change the way you approach your RPs?
Well, I think just right off, there'll be a lot of RP tenants requesting for the longer term disposition. But going back to the prior question about another issue with respect to RPs, which makes it a lot more attractive than the GLs, is that it's not so much, it's also the fact that we have state lands that was turned over from, territory days, right? And they were never surveyed. So even when Saddle Road was being designed, the new Saddle Road, the state had to incur a lot of money just survey that area. And so if you look back and why is DLNR also in another difficulty in issuing a long-term lease? You need a survey, legal meets and bounds, and map. A lot of times the RP, you don't have that. You do actually have maybe a TMK or maybe a map and a general map, but not and kind of describing the area. That's one that makes it a significance in speed and cost, because somebody has to incur the cost for the survey for a GL, a long-term lease. Yeah, and as you know, most of the state lands, especially on the Big Island and large tracts of land on Maui, are never ever been surveyed, and that's one of the big factor. Anyway, so getting and what would we? How would we transition, I think, or what would be the request if we were to get the ability to do direct leasing? I think, like you said, we would, probably be faced with a lot of applications, and we would have to take a look at that and present those. But like any other disposition, they all go before the land board one by one. So it'll be thoroughly vetted there. I don't know. I didn't really think forward about whether we want to put additional conditions or things in there. But again, with the idea that we're trying to make it equivalent to DOA, I think we'd probably try to look at what their process is, and see whether we can tap onto that. Yeah, because currently they have that ability when we transfer an RP over, the ability to convert right away to a long-term disposition, right? And I think Chair Case noted that in Punaholo.
Yeah, but we also have to consider that you're not only doing ag lands, you're doing industrial lands as well too. So
yes.
Vice Chair Bronco, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just had a question in terms of RP. Is there a certain term limit? I always hear, a 30-day revocable permit. Are you allowed to do longer, or you can only do 30 days?
Under the statute, it's 30 days at a time, but it can go on. It gets it annually renewed. And so it comes before the board. The group of permits come before the board annually to see whether they're going to renew or not renew. And we come with a staff recommendation. A lot of times, if they are good tenants and they're paying and they want to continue, and we have no further use for that, like any other use for that property, we usually continue the RP. And under the statute, they can be renewed annually. And so they can continue for a time period. But the problem from the tenant side is that these are not financeable. You can't really, a long-term lease, you can actually finance it and build some improvements on it. So many of these RPs, sometimes a lot of them tend to be in conjunction with either another parcel, a longer term disposition, whether they own it or our other parcel that they have a long-term lease on. For example, Kapapala has a long-term lease as well as RPs that was issued after the GLs were issued.
Thank you. Senator Inouye, I know you need to leave. Did you have any final comments before you head out? Sorry, you're muted.
Lorraine, you're muted.
Yes, I understand. I was typing to say goodbye. I think there's a lot more discussion that has to be continued as well, because I think we didn't have enough hearings with regards to the comments of the testimonies of the last hearing. So I think probably DOA and DLNR probably wasn't aware that we were going to ask the question if you had any more comments, because I think the testimonies the last time was a lot more than what we have today. But anyway, thanks for the participation. Good discussions, but I think we're all at pretty much the same page. We're hearing the same thing as well, and the continuation of the discussions between the agencies. So good talking to you guys. I gotta go catch my flight. Thanks.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I appreciate that. Before we wrap up, I want to mention in the chat, Nicole Galassi said regarding Dr. Moniz's comment, she wanted to add that SC Ranch and Botello Ranch are on the list, and she understood that lands were taken from them for the same reasons that KK Ranch had lands taken away. So if you could, if you go back and take a look at that list, just so we can be clear on that, I'd appreciate it. Chair Case, do you have any final comments before I turn over to your deputy to give his comments?
No, I appreciate this discussion and the time we have to really, hear some back and forth on some of these things. It really does help. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Director Masuda.
I was just wanting to say that while I appreciate Russell's lengthy explanation on RPs, simply from a public policy point of view, overall, having the authority to directly negotiate a long-term lease or terms of lease with current tenants would allow a longer term lease, which would then allow for being able to amortize the cost of surveys, amortize the cost of improvements. And so it would be an advantage to current lessees with RPs who are doing food production, for example, or pastoral leases on smaller areas, for us to be able to negotiate out a longer term lease to provide for amortizing the further cost of having a lease.
Good
Can
point.
I also
Thank
add
you.
a really important point is it allows us flexibility to go parcel by parcel and work out these multiple uses with the tenant, which we can't do in a public auction lease. You you set the terms and you put it out for bid, and then it doesn't give you the ability to have the back and forth about like what's best for the tenant and the rancher. What's how do you work in the hunting stuff? How do you work in gathering? How do you work in potential reforestation? How do you ensure local food production? All of those things, much more flexible in a direct lease.
Also gives us the opportunity to respect and give value to the current lessee's long-term contribution to Hawaii's food production, and when they are contributed significantly to our food production sustainability, it gives us the opportunity to support that lessee and help them extend their business with more investments.
I appreciate that explanation, and I think this is helping set the stage for some good conversation for next session when we look at that bill again. I appreciate that. And I would certainly encourage you to reach out to the ranching community so that they can understand the advantages for giving DLNR this additional authority, because they're skeptical. And so I just encourage you to reach out. Deputy Atta, do you want to have any final comments?
Sure, just like a quick, I guess, recap. Basically, I believe that the Act 90 transfer issue is primarily one of trying to decide who to properly manage agricultural or productive agricultural assets of the state, and I think that's the crux of the issue. It's not, and it's complex because overlaid with that basic land management function is the need to ensure that the important respective missions of the departments can be carried out unhindered as much as possible to meet the state's important long-term goals. Basically food sustainability, conservation, watershed protection, cultural preservation, recreational resource access. All of those are very important priorities of the state. And it's my opinion that the land management itself, in and of itself, does not diminish or take away any of those functions or goals. that those functions are actually an overlay over the basic land management function of what is happening, at least what is significantly happening on the land. I mean, in this case, we're talking about agriculture activity, whether it be grazing, ranching, or diversified agriculture. So I see what we're looking at is basically trying to solve a land management function while preserving our the state's ability to carry out its very important cultural and natural resource priorities. And I really appreciate, the collaborative nature of the departments in trying to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Atta. I appreciate that. Vice Chair Branco, any final comments?
Oh, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Anyone else before we wrap up? If not, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I think this was a productive conversation. I look forward to our next meeting when we can discuss some of the specifics that we would like to move forward next session. But I think if you could follow up on this, and I think Mr. Smith, if maybe you could do an update on what you sent to me about the Balthasar lease, and we can submit that as part of a testimony that we could post, that'd be great. So we can provide that information. And
Yeah, we did submit some written testimony along those lines. I can give you more information if you need.
Okay, well, then I'll look to that, and then we can post that.
Okay.
That you sent to us. Okay, great.
Thank
Any
you
other
very much for your leadership and Lorraine's leadership. Thank you.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yep. I'm grateful to be here to do the job. Okay, if there's nothing else before us, I appreciate everyone's participation today. Thank you to the public who are here to testify and those who are watching. There being no further business before us today, this meeting is now adjourned. Aloha, everyone.